My name is James Daunt. I'm the CEO at Barnes & Noble, and it is my immense pleasure and honor to introduce President Barack Obama in conversation with Isabel Wilkerson. This is a real treat for all of us. President Obama needs no introduction from me, other than to provide another affirmation of the extraordinary writing ability that he has. The two earlier books before the presidency, Dreams from My Father and The Audacity of Hope, should be read by everybody, frankly, down from the oldest and most gray-haired of us down to teenagers. And now we have A Promised Land, the first volume of his autobiography, in office. In conversation, and really nobody could be better at that than Isabel Wilkerson, Pulitzer Prize winner in journalism, many other awards, including the National Humanities Medal. The author 10 years ago or so ago of The Warmth of Other Suns, which I strongly recommend and commend to you all. And now CASTE, The Origins of Our Discontent. These are important books, and I speak as a bookseller. We are people who join a vocational trade, and it is for books such as these, books that really change our way of thinking, that most of us become booksellers. It is an honor to have with us today President Barack Obama and Isabel Wilkerson. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Oh gosh, it is such an honor and a privilege to be here with you today. I have to say that it's been such a joy to be on multiple lists with you throughout the months that our books have been out. So it's just such a thrill. Thank you for making the time. I want to say that, you've talked extensively about your book, the contents of the book, the intricacies of the politics. But today we're going to be talking about the writing. We're going to talk about essentially what's become a second career for you as a writer and going deep into that. But I want to first express my gratitude to you for what you have done in championing literature, both as president and now in the afterlife of that, where you put out these closely watched lists of recommended books. And I wondered, you also put some people on the bestseller list simply by mentioning their books. So I'd like to ask you, how did you come to that? How did you start that? What was the idea? And did you imagine it would become the literary event that it's become?
Well, first of all, Isabel, it's great to see you. And as you know, you're one of my favorites. You've been on that list several times. So I think it happened sort of organically. During my presidency, I recall that if I got off Air Force One or Marine One with a book in hand, people would notice. And apparently, I was told after the fact that it would help sales on the book. Just the fact that I was holding it. And so I thought, well, maybe I should be a little more intentional than this. I think the first list I did was a summer reading list, because I thought it would be fun. We were going to go off for vacation with the girls. And I thought, maybe people want to know what I was reading. Not all of which, by the way, was policy books and nonfiction, but I loved fiction and I loved new authors. And so over time, we developed this list, and it's something that for me communicates the importance of writing and literature as central to the American project, as central to building a healthy culture and a healthy society and a healthy nation, is us being able to hear and learn from each other through books. And I'm glad that it's helped some unknown authors.
Yeah.
Folks like you, everybody knows by now, so it's not as important. But I think for some obscure younger writers, occasionally I can maybe give them a little bit of a boost.
Well, we're also grateful for that, your generosity of that. So, as for your own book, this magisterial work that you produced, you must have had. I would imagine there'd be a tremendous weight in attempting to consolidate 8 years, and in fact, well before that, because you talk about how all the things that led up to even the decisions to run. But I would imagine that you were writing for multiple audiences. So you have everyday voters, you have policy wonks, you have future historians, the various racial, ethnic, and gender constituencies. How did you hold all those audiences in your head and manage the needs and the interests in one volume? Who were you thinking about?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Isabel, and it's one that I wrestled with a little bit during the course of the writing. My ideal reader was a curious layperson rather than an expert. I wanted somebody who cared about the world, cared about the country, was interested in issues like race or the environment or how power works in a society. But I wasn't writing for somebody who was a Washington expert and well-versed in everything and who would automatically know what a filibuster was or, the history of, deficit spending during the Depression. So as I was writing, I think my main goal was, can I make this clear to somebody who's not, part of this world or thinking about it every day? And can I make it interesting? And can I make it into a story that anyone can follow who cares to follow it? There were some constraints in balancing these constituencies because I was mindful of the fact that as a former president, historians would refer back to what I wrote. And this was probably going to be my best chance of getting the record straight on certain things where there's been either misinformation or people don't really know how I thought about an issue or how I made a decision. And so there were times where I probably went into more detail than I would have if I was just telling a story. I wanted to ask forgiveness from my readers ahead of time, where sometimes I'll go probably more into the weeds on a certain issue than I would have just for the purposes of a literary narrative. But, I figure 50 years from now, 100 years from now, when people look back, I want them to know, oh, no, that's not what I was thinking. This is what I was thinking. This was what we were doing, and this is why we were doing it.
One of the things that you managed to do is you balance the gravitas with the intimacy, the personal with the policy. And I imagine, speaking to what you were just describing, this balancing act of knowing when to go close in with something that humanizes and puts you in the moment versus telling that larger story for the record, for history. So how did you weigh that as you were writing? As you were writing, did you feel, okay, I'm going too much into the policy, I need to go step back and go? How did you balance that and alternate that?
Yeah, I think, Isabel, you've written stories of big movements of people and sweeps of history. And as you're aware, sometimes if you're staying at 40,000 feet all the time, then everything becomes very abstract.
Yeah.
And if you're on the ground all the time, then it's hard for people to get a sense of the bigger picture. So I think when I'm doing my best, I'm both taking people on a very specific journey, right? They're kind of following me and Michelle as we're going through this very strange adventure. And oh, look, suddenly here's what it's like living in the White House and having butlers who want to serve you food, except they remind you of your uncles, and so you're telling them to get out of a tux and just wear a polo shirt or whatever's comfortable because it's just us. That's a specific moment that people can, I think, relate to. They can put themselves in your shoes. But then you also want people during the course of that to understand that here's the history of presidential power and what its constraints are and how it connects to the Civil War and issues of race and caste, as you've written about. And so trying to I think, create a tempo where you're not always just on the ground and it's just a nice story, or alternatively where it's always super serious and somber and talking about history and policy. Trying to alternate in a way that maintains people's interest, I think, is how I was thinking about it, at least. It's a little bit like cooking, where you want a little bit of salt, you want a little bit of sweet, a little savory, trying to mix it up a little bit, and hopefully when it works, then people get a full meal.
I totally agree with you. Obviously, I believe that this is the most powerful form of storytelling, because you are taking the personal and putting it in context and thus making it universal. Right. And so that's the power of that. Speaking of the ways in which you do that, is that you're performing this incredible service to society, to humanity, and to history, a public service, by demystifying the process by which you became president and what it was like as you were president. And so, as I think you're aware of, and one of my favorite passages has to do with this, that's telling the tale, which is what makes narrative so powerful, of the situation where you were on the campaign in 2008 and the pilot landed in the wrong airport. I think not once, but twice.
Twice. It happened twice. Well, part of the goal for me, including the campaign and not just the presidency, was to see how it is not a glamorous process. It is you taking vans and driving around to little towns and staying in Hampton Inns and not getting enough sleep and making phone calls and people, not showing up to events or showing up and telling you what an idiot you are, and that process, I think, was important in part because it reminds people that democracy, our government, this is us. It is not something separate. It is not something apart. It is just a bunch of conversations between people and organizations made up of people with all their flaws and all their biases and all their strengths and stories. And that's how somebody gets elected, and that's how power is distributed. And so I wanted people to feel like, oh, I not only can I be a part of this, but I should be a part of this. That this isn't something alien and apart from me. And of course, that is the ideal of a democracy. But what I also wanted to do was to give particularly young people who read it a sense that even someone who ends up winning the presidency is going through a growth process. Even somebody who, by that time, I was 43 years old when I was first elected to the Senate, 47, and when I'm elected to the presidency, I'm making mistakes, and I'm not all that good in debates early on, and I'm stumbling in delivering my message, and I feel doubts, and I am tired and missing my wife and my girls, because I also wanted people to get a sense that if they pursued a large project, an ambitious project like running for president, it doesn't go smoothly, and you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to learn from it, and there's a resilience that you can find in yourself that can be valuable. And I thought that would be useful, because part of my goal in writing a book like this is for some 17-year-old or 25-year-old version of me or Michelle to be able to read that and say, okay, well, maybe I can imagine myself on a similar path and a similar journey.
Well, one of the ways that you've written it is that you suspend what we know is inevitable, what we know will happen. And you, in the writing, allow us to be in the moment, so that even though we know how it turns out, it's a reminder that to see that one's life and one's trajectory they're not necessarily inevitable. No. That all kinds of things could go wrong, and that you're the one that you have to make it so. And that's, I think, one of the messages there.
Yeah, I actually start one of the chapters in the book writing about how later, after I'd been elected, people would come up to me and, I knew you were going to be president. It was inevitable. God, laid his hands on you. And you'd say, well, as I write, I would tell, these sweet little old ladies, I said, well, I wish you had told me, because it sure didn't seem inevitable at the time. And it's a reminder that in retrospect, things look smoother and easier and destined in ways that don't feel like that in the moment. And there's a lot of contingency and a lot of luck. One of the things that I think communicate in the book, this is later in the presidency when I'm dealing with the financial crisis, and I'm meeting with CEOs and bankers and people who've been very successful and powerful, but seem to lack the humility gene, where there's a certain notion that I would confront, where people were just absolutely sure that, well, of course, I'm successful and wealthy, and because I worked hard and I deserved it, and why would anybody question me? And you want to say, well, if you don't know that you were also lucky, and that there are a whole bunch of folks out there who worked just as hard as you and had talents like you, but didn't get the same breaks you did, and if that doesn't instill in you some sense of not just humility, but responsibility to give back and to think about those who where things didn't work out, I'm very skeptical of folks who are so certain that they deserve whatever successes they get just because of they worked hard and their God-given talents. Because you and I both know a lot of folks who worked real hard and were extraordinarily gifted, but didn't have the same breaks along the way.
Absolutely. Getting into the writing. So we know that you write or you said that you write in longhand on yellow legal pads. So the question then would be, so when and where do you write? Do you outline? It's a massive, massive project. I mean, you've got, I can't imagine how many thousands of pages or tens of thousands of pages of transcriptions you've got. So do you outline? Also, when and how do the yellow legal pads make it onto a computer somehow?
All right. So a couple of details of the writing process, and some of these are just very personal quirks of mine. I write on legal pads longhand because what I found was when I type directly into a computer, it all looks nice, and so somehow I think that it must be good. And then later on, I read it back and I go, this actually isn't good. It needs more work. When I write longhand on a pad and I'm scratching things out and I'm crossing things out and I've got arrows going this way and that way, and I'm writing in the margins, it communicates better the fact that this is still a little half-baked and I haven't really figured out exactly what I want to say. It also alleviates some stress for me because if I feel less pressure to get everything right. And so sometimes I'll just fill up the pad with something. And that gives me some sense. It gives my brain time to figure out how to shape the particular part of the narrative I want to tell. At that point, depending on how well that part of the writing's gone, then I might just start typing into the computer and essentially editing what I've written onto the computer. And that becomes a pretty polished first draft by the time it gets on the computer. And so that's part of the reason why by the time I'm finished with the first draft, I've actually done a lot of work, and it's usually in better shape than some other folks' first drafts might be. I write at night because I'm a night owl. I am not good in the morning. My brain does not function well.
Mine neither.
and Michelle's different. She's a morning person. She's all chipper and alert. I don't really want to do anything mentally too strenuous until about 10 o'clock in the morning. And so my best writing time probably is, my absolute best writing time is probably about 10 o'clock until 1 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock at night till 1 o'clock in the morning. Partly because the girls are asleep. I don't have a lot of distractions. And I can really focus. The world kind of zooms in on that page. And I can get into a real rhythm. So, some people ask me, like, do I listen to music when I'm writing? I can't listen to music. I can listen sometimes to jazz, Coltrane or Miles or something, instrumental. But most of the time, then I'll start kind of bopping and, tapping my foot, and I'm not that focused on the page. So usually I'm operating on some silence when I'm writing my best.
So I have to say that for most of my writing career, I was like that, where I didn't want music. I didn't want to hear music. I wanted silence. But with this last book, I found that I needed to have music. And I want to thank you for introducing me to Philip Glass, because his music was perfect. It had meditative quality, but also propulsive. It's just absolutely perfect, and that's what helped get me through CASTE.
Well, I'm glad that that was helpful. I can see that. Philip Glass's music would be something that I could see writing to. As I said, jazz I can occasionally write to. I can sometimes write to certain kinds of classical music, like Yo-Yo Ma's cello suites, because it has that just kind of very meditative quality to it.
Exactly. Something that's not intrusive. I also found that I turned to Tibetan singing bowls. I mean, at a certain point, this last book was quite intense, and so I had to do a whole lot of things to get me through it. So I was just wondering.
Sounds like you were trying all kinds of stuff.
I was.
Whatever you were doing worked.
Whatever works. What about writer's block? I mean, how do you deal with that?
All the time.
Yeah.
Look, I was talking to a friend of mine who I think Elizabeth Alexander, who's a wonderful poet and writer, and and I think she's the first one who said this to me, but other people have said it. So it's not original to me. But when people ask, do you enjoy writing? I say, I enjoy having written. the writing process itself is painful to me. I enjoy having it done and looking back and saying, "Oh, I wrote that." Look, I'm not a particularly swift writer. The way I describe it is that for me, writing is like working out. You know, I'm going to the gym and it's painful, but I'm doing it because I know it's good for me. Once out of every 10 times I go, I feel great. And the endorphins are flowing and, you know, I feel like $1,000,000. And that's how it feels with me with writing. Most of the time I would sit there. I don't even know what writer's block means because most of the time I'm sitting there and I'm dragging this thing out. And then what's rarer are those times where it just flows and you feel like, oh, you know, you write just a page and you read it back and you say, man, that was nice. You know, that works. But
you're in the zone.
You're in the zone. But that's not typical. For me, most of it was, you know, you're laying bricks and just building. There were times where you would get just stuck. Some people I know when they get stuck writing find it easy to set it aside, just move on to something else and then come back to it. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those people. I feel like when I'm stuck, I am stuck. I've got to solve that before I can kind of get on to the next thing. So I don't really have any tricks other than just to suffer and and just keep on staring at that thing until finally something breaks. Occasionally, I guess this isn't so much a trick. Sometimes you just have to settle on, all right, this is not perfect, but it's good enough for now. You kind of get to that point where you say, all right, I know, let me put an asterisk here. I'm not happy with this transition, or I'm not happy with this scene, but it's there. It's staring at me, reminding me of my lack of talent. Let's move on.
Well, that's the gift of rewriting. That's the gift of the rewrite. You get a chance to get that right. The way that I've heard it said to what Elizabeth was saying is that writing is a wonderful thing to have done.
Same thing.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the same thing.
When you're in the middle of it, it's painful. But there are other, look, I remember talking to Toni Morrison, you know, who's a otherworldly talent. And, you know, she described it as something different, right? Almost there is a mystical quality to how somebody with those kinds of gifts can immerse themselves and move through a writing process. That's not the kind of talent I have.
Well, one of the things that I think all writers can remind themselves is that the subconscious is what's doing the writing. And so that even when we're not writing, when you're not on front of the screen, and I would imagine that the way that you go about your life, that as we've seen, as you shared with us, is that you're thinking about these things, even if you're not in front of the screen or at your notebook. So we're doing the work even when we're not actually putting words on the screen, because the subconscious is solving those problems for us.
Well, I think that's a really powerful point, Isabel. You know, people ask me a lot of times, how did you remember a bunch of this stuff? Or were you keeping contemporary journals? You know, there are times where I'd write down something that happened just because I thought to myself, all right, I want to remember exactly what was said or how this happened. But I generally didn't have time to keep journals when I was president. But you know, we're always telling a story about our life, right? You know, we go through our days constructing meaning and trying to figure out, you know, how did this happen and how does this fit into what happened before? And how does this relationship speak to me relative to the relationships I've had before? And so I think that this idea that we are always telling a story in our head, and the difference in writing a book is just trying to be a little more precise in that process and organize it and use the words so that other people feel it the way we feel it. But it's not so different than in the same way that a painter is communicating, but the experience of sight and seeing something beautiful, and I can't paint Starry Night, but I can see the stars up in the sky.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always working.
It is always. Yeah.
It doesn't always feel that way when you're staring at that blank page.
When it comes to writing and art, there's a saying that all art is abandoned, never completed. So
yeah, no,
I wanted to ask you. You were writing in the midst of COVID. I was as well. I mean, I actually, when COVID broke out, I was in the middle of the rewriting and editing, and then I ended up realizing I've got to get COVID in. I've got to get the pandemic. I've got to deal with pandemic and what CASTE can allow us to see the connections there. So I was literally working on it to the point where they basically had to say, okay, it's going off to the printer now. Like, this is like, you can't do anything more. That's it. So I was wondering, what has it been like?
Prying it out of your hands?
Exactly. So I was wondering, writing through the pandemic, what that was like for you. How did you manage to let your manuscript go? Because I know that you are a deep thinker, very introspective and analytical, and reworking things. How has that been for you?
I think it was maybe a little bit different for me than for you, Isabel, because you were writing a book that, which, by the way, I cannot recommend strongly enough. CASTE is a powerful and timely description of some long-term trends in America, and so you had to encapsulate in that book a lot of stuff that was evident as you were writing.
Yeah.
I was deliberately trying, as you mentioned earlier, to stay in the moment and not project beyond the scope of the up through the first 2 years of my presidency, because I've got another volume coming, and I didn't want to start feeling as if the reader was anticipating everything that was going to happen. So I ended with Donald Trump and birtherism, along with the bin Laden raid, both of which foreshadow a bunch of stuff that's going to happen. But I didn't feel as compelled, I think, to fit in all the subsequent events, because that's going to be in volume 2, and so I think the pressure was probably a little less on me. I did mention H1N1, but interestingly enough, I had mentioned the pandemic in an early draft, well before the pandemic, before COVID hit, because even when I left the presidency, I always used the possibility of a pandemic as an example of why you want a functioning, a functioning government with experts and people who know what they're doing and are operating logically and thoughtfully. I always used to say that's when you can tell whether you've got an effective administration in a government. When things are good, then having somebody in charge who's doesn't pay attention or isn't reading the briefings or doesn't care, you can survive that. But what you can't is during moments of crisis. So I had already used H1N1 as an example of government needing to deal with a lot of stuff that if they get it right, nobody notices.
Yeah.
It's only when they don't do it well that it turns out government's important.
It'll be interesting to see how you, with that second volume, first of all, it almost seems as if, I'm wondering if you actually have been kind of writing the second volume, even as you were writing the first one, because, you know, yet to come is Ebola, for example, which
Right.
becomes an
Same
even
kind of
closer
thing.
analog.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how you write that, knowing what was to come. And all of it is a continuing thread anyway, and isn't it?
Well, and I guess, you know, people have asked me, did I learn anything while I was writing? And the thing that I tell them is that more than anything, it reinforced the through line, the running thread in so much of American politics and American society. And it's much of the stuff that you've written about. You know, there is a direct line between, you know, the reactions to the civil rights movement through the Reagan era, through Sarah Palin, through Donald Trump, and this notion that somehow all that we end up seeing happen after both during my presidency, after my presidency, kind of popped up because of, you know, one particular reality TV star who became president. You know, that's not accurate. You know, he ended up embodying and maybe accelerating all these deeper trends, but you know, a lot of what we saw coming, you know, was there pretty early on, both in terms of issues of race and demographics, but also issues of social media and misinformation and how that was changing. And so, you know, I think that one of the values of writing during COVID was at least me being able to see more clearly the consequences of some of these trends, and hopefully be able to anticipate that the reader, as they're reading, are going to be able to make those connections and go, aha, yeah, I can see why, you know, when birtherism is catching fire, how that's going to relate to QAnon and why, you know, that was a problem. And I don't really have to draw that line for them. It's, you know, the connections end up being, I think, pretty obvious.
Well, I would say it goes back 400 years, but that's
exactly. No, that's exactly right. Right.
Yeah. So getting back to, you are clearly, I think, hands down, our best read president. You're best read president. So, and many books have been written about you. I'm wondering, have you read so much of you? How do you experience others' rendition of you, especially given that you are deeply immersed clearly in a 2-volume account from your own perspective? Do you not pay attention to those other books? Do you check them out? I mean, what's your relationship to the books written about you?
I think you don't read stuff written about yourself in the same way that you don't. Michelle and I stopped watching TV news pretty early on in the campaign.
Yeah.
Partly because it'll paralyze you if you're constantly worrying about the daily churn in the media. You realize fairly early on that there is a projection of you that becomes more and more skewed as the media becomes more polarized, right? And that is related to you, but it's not you completely. There's a character called Barack Obama who people are seeing on the screen, and then there's you. And so you don't want to get caught up in that, because I think it'll for me at least, I found that I would lose focus, and I would end up not listening to my best judgment, and I'd start getting buffeted by the winds of opinion. But you know, when I do come across, you know, passages, let's say I'm reading a book that I'm interested in, and then it refers to me, you know, you can't help but kind of get a glimpse of how sometimes your public image is and how you're perceived, and you know, you draw a few conclusions. For example, I'm much funnier than people portray me on the page. You know, I take myself much less seriously, I think, than. But Michelle's told me that before. My kids tell me that as well. They're all like, "Dad, you're kind of goofy." You know, I don't know why people always talk about you being so serious and professorial. I said, I know. I don't know why either. You know, I think maybe it's because I got a deep voice and I talk slow, so it sounds like, you know, I'm always being serious about stuff.
That's why I love the flashes of the humor in the book.
Yeah. No, you know, I'm a pretty funny guy. Michelle's funnier, as she will remind me. And I at the dinner table, I'm the brunt of Michelle and my daughter's humor. So I'm like more the straight man, and they are teasing me constantly. But part of that is because if I tease them, they get mad, you know, and they've told me, look, this is not a fair fight here. You know, there are different rules for you than for us.
Let me ask you, given that you have such an expansive reading repository in your head at any given time, and you've now obviously more than mastered nonfiction. Would you consider another genre? I mean, another president has co-written a thriller, for example. You certainly love fiction.
I do, but Isabel, I don't think I have that talent. I you know, when I was young, I think I wrote some short stories that were fiction, and they were okay. But you know, I mentioned Toni Morrison earlier. I know a number of other fiction writers who become friends, like Marilyn Robinson, you know, who wrote Gilead and some of those books. And they have a capacity to breathe life into fictional characters and make them real and true. You know, my daughters are gifted writers, and I actually see that gift in them sometimes. I'm able to describe and write about what I know and what I've seen, but creating an imaginary world, I'm not as capable of doing. And so I enjoy the gift that authors like that can give me. But I'm staying in my lane.
Well, speaking of reality and the era that we're currently in, I mean, we've come to see, you know, in recent months, you know, the fragility of our democracy. You know, we've seen what happened on January 6th. I mean, an insurrection that almost is unimaginable. I was wondering if you could share with us, you know, where you feel we happen to be right now, you know, in light of that attack on the citadel of democracy. You know, if in our lifetime, and we will have to be telling succeeding generations somehow make sense of this for succeeding generations. This is history in the making. in which we have to find analogs in other centuries in order to understand it. So I was just wondering if you might just, let us share with us how you're thinking about it and what it might take to rebuild from this.
Well, look, like everybody, I think I was horrified. I have to say, though, I was surprised by the lack of security and a plan on the part of Capitol Police. But how could you be surprised that there was going to be that impulse to rush the Capitol when you had what was then still a sitting president encouraging them to do so? And when you had 70% of Republicans at least expressing to pollsters the conviction that the election had been stolen. And you had major media companies like Fox News promoting those stories consistently. And so what I think you saw on January 6th, obviously the visual manifestation of it, of people actually breaking glass and killing a Capitol security police officer and so forth were shocking and stunning. But this was just a culmination of what we had seen over the previous 4 years and before that, in which a sizable portion of the country is being fed a false idea of what the world is like, and it is untethered from facts, and it is playing on the angers and the resentments that you've recorded in your book so masterfully. And so for us to get back to the democracy that I think we all want for future generations, we're going to have to do a lot of work around how do we educate ourselves and our kids about what this democracy is, making sure they understand history and what it is that this country has struggled with respect to issues of race and class in this society. We're going to have to get back to insisting on the importance of facts versus opinions and reason and logic as the basis in which we have public debates. So we're going to have to bring the country together outside of politics before we get any kind of functioning, unified political movement. The good news is, I think that the Biden administration has set the right tone. I think that they're dealing with this pandemic in a way that not only addresses the immediate crisis, but recognizes the underlying inequities in healthcare and how people have been affected economically in a way that I think lifts up some of these underlying issues. And we now have a chance to start rebuilding social trust and a unifying narrative. But I think it's going to take some time. And as you point out, Isabel, so much of the disruption of our politics has been based on a sense of shifting status inside American society. And, I think whether it's race or gender, whether it's men worrying about women getting, too much power at their expense, or whites being concerned about changing demographics in the society, or regional shifts between city and suburb, or city and rural areas. We have to frankly acknowledge that those are difficult issues. They're not unique to the United States, as you point out. We're seeing that everywhere. And that a future politics is going to have to be based on the notion that we have to take care of everybody and there is room at the table for everybody. And that, all of us can have status and dignity and respect if we are willing to share it with others. But that's a hard lesson. That's, after 400 years, we still haven't fully learned that lesson or taught that lesson to our kids. And we're going to have more work to do in order for us to really live that out in our democracy.
Where do you see being able to build those bridges or to reach people who are that disaffected, who are that distant, who are, to have this level of cleavage and disruption in the body politics such as this? I mean, where, with all of your experience and perspective, where do you see that pushing through?
The good news is, Isabel, is that as I traveled around the country when I was president, and as I travel around still, and I think the public surveys show this, the younger generation is better at this than the older folks are. I try to remind my daughters that I was born in a time when most of the South was still de facto completely segregated. I was 6 years old before the Supreme Court said that it was unconstitutional for a state to forbid people of different races to marry. I was 6. And so in the span of history, we are not that far away from de jure, explicit racial segregation. We are not that far away from a time where it was a given that women did not have the same opportunity as men to go to school, much less to compete with men for jobs or power or authority. The movement for the LGBT community to be recognized, much less treated equally, that's 2 decades old, 2.5, which in the life of a nation is a blip.
Yeah.
And so my optimism in part comes from the fact that when I talk to my daughter's generation, it's a given to them, not just my daughters, but their white friends, their male friends, their straight friends, that you'd never consider treating people differently based on race or gender or sexual orientation, that everybody has a claim to dignity and respect and opportunity. That they take that for granted. And when you look at the surveys, you see that. So I think investing in our young people is the way to go. Michelle's mom, I love Ms. Marion Robinson, my mother-in-law, and she always, she's 86 now. She says, just sometimes just these old people we're just gonna have to die off because we're all, trapped in our old ways of thinking. And I think that there's some truth to that. But and of course they should read your book, Isabel. CASTE. It's wonderful. But listen, it's been so nice being with you. What a great conversation. We can go on forever, but I know that our time has run short.
You must have gotten the warning too. So thank you so much for making the time. I've just enjoyed it so much. Thank you.
It was
and I'll
wonderful
best
to see you. And I look forward to seeing you in person.
Yes.
Once the COVID threat has lessened. And I think we're all looking forward to being back in bookstores. And I do miss just interacting with people who are reading the book in person rather than by Zoom.
Absolutely. Be safe and be well.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.